Today, let's walk through another presser foot, which is the cording presser foot. Welcome, I do sewing and DIY related content, and today we are talking about a new presser foot, and that is the cording presser foot. So you can see here it has a little interesting of a shape. It's almost like half of your normal presser foot, and then it has this bar with little grooves on it. So these grooves actually go underneath as well, and then they are on the bottom of the presser foot too. And what this does is it allows you to have very thin cording, twine, or other types of string, and you'll be able to sew that into your fabric and guide it. So if we look at the sizing, we can see it's about a little bit bigger than an inch. Here's my regular presser foot. So my regular presser foot's actually bigger than this cording presser foot is. There's a kind of a different shape to it. In addition, you can see on the cording presser foot that you have those grooves like we talked about earlier, and then on your regular presser foot, it's completely smooth on the bottom. So there's nothing to guide it, where on this cording presser foot, you do have those little guides that would kind of take the cord or whatever you're sewing will help it kind of guide it through the whole stitch. Now with this, I will say it's very important to use very thin cording. So whatever type of string you're sewing in, you want it to be thin or the size of those grooves. If not, it will get stuck, and I'll show you what that looks like in a little bit, just so in case you try to use this foot, you are not surprised by it as well. So for this, I decided to try to use a couple of different techniques. I saw lots of people online were talking about using yarn. I only had these two types of yarn on hand, and then I had some of this elastic cording, which I thought was really thin. As you'll see, it does not work. So I did try out some other items. So I had this thicker thread that doesn't really work too well in my sewing machine, so I decided to give that a try, as well as some very almost flat silky ribbon. So we're going to be trying all of these different items. So now let's go over to the sewing machine and let's set it up. So here's my sewing machine. As you can see, I have my cording presser foot here. It's very easy to install. There's this bar, it just clips in, so I have a little black button in the back that I press and then just clips on your sewing machine. Now to actually install it though, I would highly recommend putting in your cording or twine or whatever type of decor you are sewing onto your fabric. So for example, if I want to try to use this yarn that I had, this was where I learned that the yarn was too thick. So while it does go through and you can actually clip it under so it fits into those grooves even tighter, it just was not going to work for the sewing. So instead I did get my little elastic cording that I had, which I thought was going to fit. When I put it through the groove on the back, it fit, but then at the front you can either have it go on top, so there are little grooves on top, or you can clip it into place. I just had to go through on top, and then once I had that already in, so that the cording was underneath but also going through the top like you can see there, I then began the process of trying to sew it. Now my needle was not in the correct spot, and for this presser foot you do want to use a zigzag stitch. So I'm just going to be using a regular one stitch zigzag stitch, so you can see that the needle is just going to go back and forth over top of the elastic. Now when I do this, what is going to happen is that this elastic is actually too thick. So if you want to sew elastic on, like the idea would be that you would give it some pull and then you would sew the elastic on using that zigzag stitch, and it's actually going to help your fabric sort of scrunch up similar to like a shearing effect. You want to use elastic thread though for this, not elastic cording. So as you can see, it got all bunched up, it did not work correctly. And this is what happens if you try to use thread or some sort of cording that is too thick. It's not going to give you that nice and clean look, and it'll most likely get stuck and you're not going to be able to move your fabric. So then what I tried to do was use my very flat silky ribbon, and while this did work, you could sort of tell that it was too big for the grooves, so I more just had to guide it myself. But if you're using that zigzag stitch, you can see that the ribbon is able to go back and forth underneath, and then the needle is just going to go on the left and right side. So I have the zigzag stitch set up. And now it is time to begin the actual sewing process. So because this was thinner and it was actually flat, it worked a lot better, a lot smoother. And you can see that the stitch is actually working, so the ribbon was able to be attached and it just gives you a nice little decorative effect. Again, I don't really know if I would use this too much, but I did decide to try one more example, and that was using this like thicker thread. So I have 3 pieces of this thread. Because it was still pretty thin, I just have this in one of the grooves. I have a tail in the back that I'm holding on to, and I just did that zigzag stitch to sew it in place. And it gave it like a really cool look. I'm actually really happy with how it turned out. I think that this was kind of a fun idea, especially if you want to add some decorations. So now what we're trying to do is do that 3 times. So I have 3 pieces of thread that I have grouped together, and then I have each thread into one of those little grooves. So you can see there's actually 3 larger groups of thread, and then they are each in their own groove. I have it attached so that it's going underneath the presser foot, so it's in the grooves in the back, and then I do have the rest of it on the grooves in the front. Now for this, we're going to be using a 3-stitch zigzag, and that's so that one stitch goes over each of those rows. So now we're just going to begin the process of sewing it, so very carefully going through, doing that zigzag stitch to sew all this in place. You do want to adjust the thread as you go along to make sure it stays in those grooves, and this is what it ends up looking like. I definitely think I could be practicing a little bit more with this to try to get different types of cording and ribbon to work. Honestly though, this probably is not my favorite presser foot. I understand that it could provide you some really nice details or decorations depending on what you're using this for. I just found it to be a lot of work, and I personally don't sew with ribbon or trims this often that I would need to pull out the separate presser foot. Let me know if you've used one of these before and what you find to be the best cording or thread to use with it. I would love to know. Maybe I'm just doing something wrong. But if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know what you want to see next. Thanks for watching.